Hello again. Welcome back. We're going to finish up this little series on specific viruses, and I kind of want to just get right into it. Talk about Ebola and the Marburg viruses, two of the nastiest types of viruses out there. They are hemorrhagic fever viruses. Hemorrhaging means bleeding. Here's just an animation of this virus. It's snake-like, it's kind of long, and again, these glycoproteins can help it enter the cell. And it's a single-stranded RNA. For those who are wondering, it's a single-stranded RNA virus. Nothing too unusual, except it's kind of it's a little bit larger for a virus. But it is hemorrhagic, and here's a microscope picture of the Ebola virus. What's unusual about this and what makes it so deadly is the target cell. I read somewhere recently that there's only one or two particular immune cells that the Ebola virus can't infect. So mainly it can infect so many different types of cells. It has the ability to get inside and reproduce and destroy those cells. These fibroblasts seem to be its preferred cell, and they, as this diagram here kind of is trying to show you, I found it goes to a lot of different cell types, a lot of connective tissue, and that's what can lead to some of the problems associated with the bleeding part. All right, the disease progression for Ebola. It starts off with just kind of flu-like symptoms, your usual kind of symptoms: fever, chills, muscle ache. But that'll last for a few days, and the problem though is the hemorrhage, the bleeding part, hemorrhaging. And what Ebola does when it's infecting you is it has a protein that prevents cells from sticking together. And cells, as they adhere together, they can they prevent things from getting out because they're making a barrier there. But as they lose this ability to stick together, they start to leak fluids, and that's where the blood leaking comes in, and the hemorrhaging. You basically start hemorrhaging everywhere. The mortality rate for this actually is 30 to 90% lower than rabies, although it's more prevalent than rabies now. But it's the bleeding, and once you get to a certain point, your organs start failing. It's a pretty nasty virus. No real cure. The only way to really heal yourself from this is to allow your immune system to take care of it. It's really a race between the disease fighting and getting you and your immune system. One thing I don't have on here when I added it was the transmission. It's unlike coronavirus, which can be transmitted through the air. Ebola and Marburg, they're transmitted through body fluids. So really, you've got to be in contact with somebody in order to pass it. Which helps prevent the spread of Ebola. The next disease up, smallpox, which is not around anymore, but I like to talk about it. It was a big virus and killed many people, but was eradicated in 1979 through different isolation techniques and vaccinations. And there's a lot of variola virus. It's a variola virus, like chickenpox. And it is made of double-stranded DNA. I think it's our first DNA virus that we've talked about. There's a picture of it here, and it causes these huge welts and bumps on the skin. And there are some people would get covered, and it can lead to scarring. And so the progression of smallpox was it was kind of a long-lasting illness as well. It started off with, again, the usual fever, headache, chills, and then you end up with a rash, and this rash forms into bumps, and these bumps kind of become pustules, and then they eventually kind of crust over and form this deep crust, and it's deep into the epidermis of the skin, and then it takes about 14 days for the rash to fall, or for the crust to fall off, and that crust can still have actual smallpox virus in it. And then afterwards, if you survive, widespread scarring occurs. There is a strain of smallpox, the bad type, which was hemorrhagenic as well. You get some of the pox marks become black, and you get blood underneath the skin surface. And in some cases, the skin will just kind of shed itself away, and you just bleed out and die. Not a good way to go. Luckily, we don't really have to worry about that. But do know that as the world was eradicating smallpox, for each smallpox sample that in each outbreak, the CDC in Atlanta was being sent a sample, and the sample would also be sent to Moscow. And they still have smallpox in these labs frozen away. If you're interested in smallpox, I would read Demon in the Freezer, which is a good book. It's about smallpox and the anthrax threat as well. There are different variola, and this is very similar to chickenpox, which you get a vaccine for, but there are this similar pox viruses for all sorts of organisms. Kind of like we were talking about the cordyceps fungus and how it infects a wide range of insects and different things. Same with these variola, pox viruses. And then finally, I have a few minutes. There are other viruses. I could keep going on these viruses, but I want to keep you up, bore you too much here. But Zika was in the news a couple years ago. I'm going to take a second to talk about Zika. Zika virus is kind of a small virus. It's another RNA virus. It's got those glycoproteins and whatnot. But the main thing with Zika, if you get it, it's a mosquito-borne virus, and if you get it, not a big deal. It's probably not even going to notice. Very, very mild symptoms. The issue with Zika is the microcephaly, which is the small head of children that were born from pregnant women that had gotten Zika. And what they think happens is that the Zika virus will actively target cells within the fetus, the developing baby, these stem cells, and they cause these stem cells, which can turn into any type of cell, they cause them to prematurely specialize, or they're destroyed prematurely, and that triggers a pathway that I'm not that familiar with, but it triggers a pathway that leads to this microencephaly. Adenovirus, I thought I had adenovirus up here, is a kind of a cool looking one, which causes the common cold, common cold, bronchitis. Again, you probably had an adenovirus. It's not going to hurt you too bad. The flu is pretty deadly, can be deadly. One thing that I've come to realize, the flu, even though you get the fever and the chills, one big aspect for all of these viruses is a condition called sepsis, which I'd always associate with bacterial infections, but in fact it can be with viruses as well. And your body basically is reacting and overreacting to the threat of the virus, and it's almost like an overreactive immune response, like an allergy. Then you have hantavirus, which isn't too big of an issue. It's 38% mortality rate, but it's not really out there very much. And that's a pulmonary issue as well, with the lungs and the fluid filling in the lungs, kind of like the coronavirus. And finally, rotavirus, which we don't worry about too much, is a diarrheal virus. This causes you to have massive diarrhea. And in the United States, we don't have to worry about it. The issue with diarrhea is you become dehydrated and die if you don't replenish and rehydrate. So we can handle those pretty well. But in some areas of the world, diarrheal diseases used to be the number one cause of death in the world. Thankfully, not anymore. Well, that's all I have for now. Don't forget to subscribe. Enjoy yourselves as we are on break. Bye.